There are days when you feel the weight of your life like a thick, suffocating fog. You don't see it coming, but it creeps up on you slowly, bit by bit, until you're standing there, looking around, wondering how you got here. That's where I was, sitting in my car in front of the house, with the engine off, the keys in my hand, and the weight of 1,000 decisions pressing on me. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I wasn't supposed to be the guy who ended up like this. But here I was. You ever just wake up and realize that the world you've built is a house of cards? One small flick, one tiny push, and it all crumbles. That's what happened to me. My marriage was fine, I guess. At least, that's what I told myself. We had been together for years. We had the house, the routine, the fake smiles, and the comfortable silences. For a while, I convinced myself that it was enough. But somehow, when I wasn't looking, I had lost touch with everything real. I remember the moment it all became clear. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a loud, dramatic outburst. It was something so simple, so easy to ignore. It was when she asked me, "Do you even remember what our anniversary is?" It wasn't even a sarcastic remark or a joke. It was a question, and I didn't have an answer. I paused, trying to pull some thread of memory together, but it was gone. I was supposed to know, right? It was supposed to be this sacred day that we celebrated, but in that moment, it felt like I was caught in a web of silence, staring at her face, realizing that I had become a ghost in my own life. That was the first crack in the wall. It wasn't just the anniversary. It was the little things. The small touches that used to come easily, now nothing more than rare occurrences. The lazy evenings where we used to talk for hours had turned into nights where we both scrolled through our phones in separate rooms. I didn't want to admit it, but I was suffocating. We had become strangers living in the same house, passing like ships in the night. I wasn't the first to notice it, but I was definitely the first to feel it. Then came that month. It was a month that changed everything. One night, I walked into the living room after a long day, hoping for something, anything, that might bring us back together. I thought maybe I could make a joke, spark a conversation, something to break the ice. But she was there, sitting on the couch, staring at her phone, with a glass of wine in her hand, completely uninterested in anything I had to say. I watched her for a moment, and then something inside of me snapped. I had been begging for her attention for months, but tonight was different. This time, I wasn't going to beg. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice sounding foreign even to me. She didn't even look up. "About what?" I stared at her, feeling that tightness in my chest. This wasn't us. This wasn't the life I had imagined when we first got together. She wasn't listening. She wasn't even there. A month had passed since that night. A month of silence, a month of endless excuses. I had gone through the motions, pretending that I was okay, but every day felt heavier. And I realized something. I couldn't do this anymore. I wasn't going to be the one begging for affection. I wasn't going to be the one waiting for a miracle that would never come. I had tried everything. I had tried being the patient husband, the thoughtful partner, the understanding listener. But nothing worked. She didn't care. That night, on the eve of our anniversary, I did something I never thought I would do. I left. I grabbed my keys, slipped out the back door, and drove away. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of clarity. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I just felt free. I parked my car in front of the coffee shop, staring at my phone. I had been planning to call her, to explain myself, but I didn't have the words anymore. Instead, I typed something that felt like a declaration. "I'm looking for a new wife." I sat there for a moment, staring at the screen, waiting for the inevitable flood of messages and calls. I knew she'd be furious. I knew she'd be confused. But I didn't care. I had taken control. And that was just the beginning. What came next? That's where the real story begins. The response didn't come immediately. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the words on the screen, my finger hovering over the send button. It felt almost like a challenge to myself. Could I really do this? Was I really ready to break the silence, to break the mold that had held me captive for so long? As I sat there, the weight of the decision began to settle in, but there was no turning back now. I pressed send, and within seconds, my phone buzzed. "Where are you?" came the first text. It was short, terse, and full of that cold, emotionless energy that had become the hallmark of our relationship. B wasn't asking where I was because she cared. She was asking because I had disrupted her carefully constructed world, the one where I had played the dutiful husband, the one where everything was fine because neither of us was brave enough to admit it wasn't. The next message came almost immediately. "You can't be serious. What the hell is this about?" I didn't respond. Not right away. Instead, I sat there, letting the silence in the car fill the space between us. I didn't know if I felt relieved, scared, or just numb. Maybe it was all of them at once. I hadn't expected her to take it well. Hell, I didn't expect anything except for the chaos that would follow. But part of me couldn't help but wonder, what if this was it? What if this was the point of no return? The moment where everything unraveled, and I finally broke free from the endless cycle of disappointment. I took a deep breath, leaned back in my seat, and turned off my phone. I didn't want to deal with her frantic attempts to get me to come back, to apologize, to explain myself. I had given her enough of that. For years, I had bent over backward to keep things good enough, to keep the peace, to keep pretending. But no more. The hours passed slowly, and by the time I drove back home, the streets felt eerily quiet. The house loomed in front of me, familiar and yet so foreign at the same time. I hadn't realized just how much I had grown to resent it. The place that was supposed to be a sanctuary, now a prison. I sat there for a while, staring at the house, wondering what would happen when I walked through the door. What would she say? What would I say? When I finally stepped inside, Bea was sitting on the couch, her eyes red from the crying she'd clearly done since I left. But there was no apology, no explanation, no moment of clarity. Just anger. She stood up as soon as she saw me, her eyes burning with frustration. "How could you do this to me?" she spat. I didn't answer at first. I just stood there, looking at her, feeling a strange sense of detachment. The person standing in front of me wasn't the woman I had fallen in love with, wasn't the woman I had spent years trying to make happy. No, this was a stranger, someone I barely recognized. And that realization stung worse than anything she could say. "I'm not doing this anymore, Bea," I finally said, my voice calmer than I expected. "I'm done pretending that this is okay. You don't love me. You haven't loved me in a long time. And I'm not going to waste any more of my life hoping that things will change." She opened her mouth to say something, but I stopped her. "Don't bother. I don't need excuses anymore. I don't need to hear how sorry you are or how you've been too busy. I'm not asking for anything from you. I'm asking for myself." Her face twisted in confusion and disbelief. "So what now? You just walk away? You think you can replace me like that?" For the first time, I allowed myself to feel something other than anger. I felt sad. Not for her, not for me, but for what we had lost. We had spent years together, and yet, in that moment, I realized that we were both strangers, shackled to a life neither of us truly wanted anymore. "I don't know what comes next, Bea," I said softly, my eyes fixed on hers. "But I do know that I'm not the one who has been checking out of this marriage. You've been gone for a long time now. I'm just the last one to realize it." She stood there, mouth agape, no words coming. It felt like a final goodbye, like a door closing on something I had fought so hard to preserve, even when I knew deep down that it was already broken. I walked past her, not looking back, and grabbed my bag from the hallway. The weight of the decision still felt surreal, but it was mine to make. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: relief. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to be the one left behind anymore. And that was just the beginning. What came next was the part of the story where things got really complicated, where the lies started to unravel, and the truth came to light in ways I never saw coming. The next few days felt like a blur. My life had suddenly been thrown into chaos, and it seemed like every part of me was struggling to keep up. I was going through the motions, but everything felt disconnected, as if I were watching myself from the outside. The house felt empty, and I felt even emptier. I had no plan, no direction, just a burning need to escape, to leave behind the suffocating weight of a life I hadn't even realized I was drowning in. I stayed at a cheap motel for the first few nights. It wasn't glamorous, but it was enough. I didn't need luxury. I needed space. I needed time to think. But the silence was deafening. I kept replaying everything in my head. The years of subtle neglect. The way she had slowly withdrawn from me until she was nothing more than a cold, distant figure. She had checked out long before I did, but I had been too blind to see it. It was strange, being in that motel room, so far removed from the life I had known. It gave me the clarity I never had before. I started to see things for what they really were. The excuses she gave me, the empty promises, the way she never truly fought for us. It was all laid bare. I wasn't the only one who had been lying to myself. She had been lying too. But I wasn't going to do it anymore. I wasn't going to keep pretending. Then came the phone call. I hadn't expected her to reach out so soon. After everything that had happened, I figured we'd both need time to process, to breathe. But there it was. My phone buzzed in the middle of the night. It was her. "Where are you?" she asked, her voice low, almost pleading. "We need to talk." I stared at the screen for a moment, my finger hovering over the call button. I had no desire to talk to her. Not now, not after everything. But something inside me, some primal need to get answers, to finally confront the mess we had created, urged me to pick up. So I did. "B, I don't think there's anything left to say," I said, my voice tired but resolute. "I've already made my decision. I'm not coming back." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, and it hit me just how much I didn't know her anymore. The woman I had spent years with, she was a stranger to me now. "You can't just walk away from everything we built," she said, her voice shaking. "We have a life together, a future. You're throwing it all away." I felt a knot twist in my stomach, but I stood my ground. "You don't get it, B. I've been walking away for years. You just didn't notice." Her silence was louder than any argument we could have had. It was the silence of someone who had been confronted with the truth they never wanted to hear. The truth that, deep down, she knew. The truth that we were both stuck in a cycle of misery because neither of us was brave enough to leave. "I never wanted it to end like this," she finally whispered. "I never wanted to hurt you." I didn't know how to respond. The words felt hollow, like empty promises that had been used too many times before. I didn't want to hear them anymore. I wanted action, not apologies. I wanted change, not regret. But I also knew something else. I couldn't keep punishing myself by staying in a relationship that was already over. "I know you didn't want to hurt me, B. But you did. Every day. And I let you," I said, my voice cracking for the first time. "I let you because I didn't know how to let go. But now I do." There was another pause, this one heavier, more painful. Then she spoke again, her voice breaking. "What now?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I can't stay here anymore. I can't keep pretending everything's fine when it's not. I need to find something, anything, that feels real again. And that's not here." I hung up before she could respond. I couldn't bear to hear anything else. The decision had been made. There was no going back. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had taken control of my own life. The days after that call were a blur of emotions, grief, relief, anger, and an overwhelming sense of freedom. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew I had to keep moving forward. I couldn't go back to the person I was before, the one who kept asking for more, who kept hoping for change. I had learned that hope wasn't enough. Change required action, and I had taken mine. But just when I thought I could breathe easy, the unexpected happened. A few days later, I received a message, this time, not from B, but from someone else. Someone I hadn't heard from in years. A blast from the past, a name I thought I had long since forgotten, Mara. She had been someone I'd met years ago, before B and I got serious. We had shared a connection back then, but life had pulled us in different directions. Mara was someone who always seemed to understand me in ways no one else did. I hadn't thought about her in a long time, but the message was simple and to the point. "I heard about what happened. I think it's time we finally catch up." My heart skipped a beat. Part of me wanted to dismiss it, to move on from all of this, to not let the past get in the way. But the other part of me, the part that had been starved for real connection, for something raw and real, couldn't resist. I didn't know it then, but this message would be the spark that set off a chain of events I couldn't have predicted. What followed was a journey I never thought I'd take. A journey that would change everything I thought I knew about love, loss, and what it means to truly let go. And it all started with one simple message. The message from Mara lingered in my mind for days, occupying every empty space in my head. I had no idea why it hit me the way it did. I hadn't thought about her in years. In fact, when she first reached out, I was almost sure I'd just ignore it. Life had already become complicated enough, and the last thing I needed was to drag the past back into my already messy reality. But as much as I tried to push it away, the thought of her kept circling back, like a magnet pulling at something deep inside me. I'd been trying to escape my marriage for months, only to find myself stuck in a different kind of emotional labyrinth. Now, Mara was offering me a lifeline, or at least that's what it felt like. A connection, an out, a chance to relive the version of myself I used to be before everything got so tangled and messy. I finally decided to reply, not with the intention of rekindling something, but more out of curiosity. What did she want? Why reach out now, after all these years? I could almost feel the weight of her words on the screen as I typed my response. It's been a while. What's up? I hit send and put the phone down, pacing around my small hotel room. The feeling of unease had settled into my chest, but there was something else, an inexplicable sense of excitement. This wasn't supposed to be exciting. It was just an old acquaintance reaching out. But something about her message felt different, like it was dragging me back to a time when I was still a person who felt alive, not just the shell of a man who had been left to fester in the ruins of a broken marriage. I didn't have to wait long for her reply. It came just minutes later. I heard what happened. I'm sorry. I think we should talk. Catch up? Maybe over coffee? I stared at the screen, and for the first time in a long while, I actually felt like someone saw me. Not as a husband or a failure, not as a guy who had been relegated to the sidelines of his own life, but as me, a person. I hesitated for a moment, feeling that old guilt clawing at me. What was I doing? I had just walked away from my marriage. Was this a sign of weakness? Was I just looking for something to fill the void? But the void had been there for so long, and no amount of pretending or forcing myself to stay in a place where I didn't belong was going to fix it. I needed to know what she wanted, and honestly, I needed to know why it had taken her so long to reach out. Sure, let's meet. I typed back, almost before I could talk myself out of it. The time and place were set. A cafe downtown, the same one where Mara and I had spent hours talking years ago, laughing and making plans for the future that would never come to fruition. I wasn't sure what I was expecting when I arrived, but I didn't expect the flood of emotions that hit me when I saw her. She hadn't changed much, still the same wild hair, the same mischievous smile that used to make my heart race. She had this energy about her, an electric spark that made the room come alive. And there she was, sitting at a table by the window, looking just as she had in my memory. As I walked toward her, I felt a rush of nostalgia hit me, but I also felt something deeper, a desire to connect with someone who wasn't me. I was tired of being in the dark, tired of feeling invisible. I wanted someone who would see me, who wouldn't make me fight for attention. Mara looked up as I approached, her eyes lighting up with recognition. It's been way too long, she said, her voice warm, and for a moment, I felt like I was back in time, in a different life. Yeah, it has, I replied, taking the seat across from her. I almost didn't recognize you. She laughed softly, but there was something different about her laughter now. It wasn't carefree like it used to be. It was laced with the weight of everything we had both lived through. I saw the news, she said, getting straight to the point. I didn't know if I should reach out, but I heard about your marriage. I just felt like I should. I nodded, unsure of what to say. The truth was, I wasn't ready to dive into the messy details of my failed marriage just yet. I wasn't ready to explain how long I had been hanging on, hoping for something that never came. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, looking at her, unsure of where to go from here. It's been rough, I admitted, finally breaking the silence. I thought I could make it work, but it's over now. I paused, feeling the weight of those words settle in my chest. I don't know why I'm telling you this. Mara looked at me, her expression softening. Because I'm someone who understands what it feels like to lose yourself in something, to lose your own identity. I didn't expect her to say that. I didn't expect anyone to understand. I've been there, she continued. I was in a relationship once that drained me, and it took me a long time to find my way back to myself. It's not easy. Her words struck a chord deep within me. It was like she could see straight through me, straight to the part of me that had been buried for so long. The part of me that still had hope, that still wanted to feel alive again. We talked for hours. The conversation flowed easily, almost like we had never been apart. But there was something different about this talk. It wasn't just about catching up. It was about reconnecting with a version of myself that had long been forgotten. A version that was capable of laughing, of loving, of living without the weight of someone else's indifference hanging over me. At the end of the evening, when we said goodbye, I realized something. This wasn't just about Mara. It wasn't about rekindling an old flame. It was about me finally starting to see myself again. It was about reclaiming the pieces of me that I had lost while trying to fix a marriage that was never meant to be fixed. And as I walked back to my car that night, I realized I wasn't just stepping away from B. I was stepping towards something else. Something unknown, but something that had the potential to make me feel whole again. What came next, though, would push me further than I ever thought possible. And it was only the beginning of a much bigger story than I ever expected. In the days that followed my meeting with Mara, everything seemed to shift. It wasn't a dramatic change at first, but there was an undercurrent of something new in my life. It was like I had been walking through a fog for so long, and now, someone had finally turned on the lights. I could see the outlines of things more clearly, what I had been missing, what I had been denying. I wasn't sure if it was the conversation with Mara that triggered it or just the fact that I had finally taken a step out of the life I had been so suffocated by, but something inside of me was waking up. I spent the next few days trying to get my head straight, figuring out what to do next. B had tried to contact me, of course. She was desperate, leaving messages, sending emails, even calling my friends to see if anyone knew where I was. But the more she tried to pull me back into her orbit, the more I realized that I couldn't go back to what we had. What we had was gone, buried beneath layers of lies, neglect, and missed opportunities. And now, I was starting to see that there was a world outside of that, a world where I could be something more than just her shadow. One night, as I sat in a diner, nursing a cup of coffee and flipping through old photos on my phone, I received a message from Mara. It was simple, just a text that read, "I know this is sudden, but I'm going to be in town next week. Would you like to meet up again?" The words hit me like a spark. There was something about them that felt different than anything I had experienced in a long time. Like she was reaching out to me in a way that was completely unguarded, without expectations or pressure. I didn't even think about it. I immediately replied, "Yeah, I'd love that. Let me know when." The next few days dragged by, but my mind was preoccupied. I hadn't been able to get her out of my head. It wasn't just that Mara was a reminder of the past. It was that she had something in her that made me feel seen. For the first time in months, I wasn't being ignored. I wasn't being dismissed. I wasn't just the guy in the background waiting for a glimmer of attention. Mara wasn't just offering me a coffee date. She was offering me an escape from the suffocating silence that had defined my life with B. When the day came, I couldn't help the rush of nervous energy that hit me as I prepared to meet Mara again. I found myself second-guessing everything. What was this? What was I hoping for? A reunion? A chance to rekindle something that was long past? Or was I simply seeking out something real, something that would make me feel whole again? I couldn't answer that, and part of me didn't want to. I didn't want to dissect the why of it all. I just wanted to feel something for once. I wanted to break free from the numbness. I arrived early, something I hadn't done in ages. I had always been the one who waited, the one who followed the script. But today was different. I felt in control, even if I wasn't sure where that control would lead me. As I stood in the cafe, scanning the room for her, I suddenly felt like I was walking into something more significant than a simple coffee date. It wasn't about the past. It wasn't about what had been. This moment, this meeting, felt like it could be the start of something new, something that I could actually shape. And then I saw her. Mara stood at the entrance, her eyes scanning the room before locking onto mine. The smile that spread across her face was familiar, but also somehow new. It wasn't just a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that told me she had been waiting for this, that we both had been waiting for this. It was like everything that had happened in our past had led us to this moment. The years apart, the different paths we'd taken, had all culminated in this single, fleeting second where we were finally in the same place at the same time. She walked toward me, and I stood, almost automatically. The air between us shifted, charged with the kind of energy that's only found in moments of profound change. We didn't say much at first. There was no need to. The past few years of silence had built a certain kind of anticipation in both of us, an unspoken understanding that everything had led to this. There was no pretense here, no games, just two people who had been through different struggles but were now standing on the same ground. "I'm glad we're doing this," Mara said, taking a seat across from me. I nodded. "Yeah, me too." We ordered our drinks and sat in comfortable silence for a while, just soaking in the presence of each other. It was so easy to talk to her, to connect, to remember what it felt like to truly see someone. I wasn't worried about the future or the past in that moment. I was just here, with her, with no expectations other than to enjoy the company. Eventually, the conversation turned to more personal things, our lives in the years since we last saw each other. I told her about B, about the collapse of my marriage, how I had spent so long trying to make it work, trying to convince myself that I could salvage something that was already gone. I could see the understanding in Mara's eyes. She wasn't just listening. She was empathizing, feeling the weight of my words as though she had lived them herself. "I know what that feels like," she said quietly, her voice soft but steady. "I've been there too. When you give so much of yourself to someone and you end up losing yourself in the process." I looked at her, searching her eyes for something. Anything that could tell me if this was the start of something more. Was this just a meeting between two old friends? Or was there more to it than that? Before I could ask the question that was lingering in my mind, she spoke again. "I don't know where this is going, but I think it's worth finding out." Her words hit me like a jolt of electricity. Suddenly, it wasn't just about the past anymore. It wasn't just about the shattered pieces of my marriage or the regrets that had piled up over the years. It was about the possibility of something new. It was about the choice I had in front of me, to keep looking back or to move forward. I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing. I wasn't ready to close the door on this. Not yet. What was waiting on the other side? I had no idea, but I was willing to find out. And just like that, I took a step into the unknown, ready for whatever came next. The following days felt like a slow unraveling of everything I thought I knew about myself, about my life, and about the people I had surrounded myself with. It was as if stepping into a new chapter meant shedding the weight of the old one. I had never expected meeting Mara to do this to me. Didn't expect the sense of freedom, the sense of possibility that seemed to spring out of nowhere, but it did. I had been stuck in a loop for so long, living in the shadow of a marriage that had long since died, ignoring the signs, trying to force something that wasn't meant to be. That now, when faced with the possibility of starting over, it felt terrifying, yet strangely exciting. Every moment I spent with Mara seemed to unearth a part of myself I had forgotten. I started opening up in ways I hadn't done in years, speaking without holding back, sharing pieces of my life I'd kept locked away for far too long. I could feel the connection between us growing, subtle at first, but undeniable. There was something about her, about the way she listened, the way she didn't judge, the way she made me feel like I mattered again. She was not the person I had once known, but there was an undeniable familiarity in her presence, like coming home to something you didn't know you were missing. One night, as we sat in a quiet park under the dim glow of a street lamp, I asked her what had brought her back into my life. I had to know. It felt too surreal that after all these years, after everything that had passed, we were here, talking as if no time had passed at all. "I don't really know," she replied, her voice thoughtful. "I guess I heard about what happened, and I couldn't just let it go. I thought maybe it was a sign that we were meant to cross paths again. I had to reach out, because I think we both needed to find closure. Or maybe just something different. Something real." The honesty in her voice hit me hard. It was the kind of raw truth I hadn't heard in years. Not from B, not from anyone. There was no pretension, no artifice, just a willingness to be real, to face things as they were. In that moment, I realized something. I was starting to feel things again. I was starting to feel, period. And that was both terrifying and liberating. The weeks that followed were a blur of quiet moments, deep conversations, and slow realizations. I spent less and less time in the motel, slowly moving my things into a small apartment. There was a lightness in my step that I hadn't felt in years, and I was starting to understand that, although the past still had its hold on me, it didn't define me. I didn't need to cling to the ghost of a marriage that had long since crumbled to feel validated. I was worthy of something more. But even as I embraced this new sense of freedom, the remnants of my old life remained. B continued to try to reach me, calls, texts, emails, voicemails filled with pleas, regrets, and frustration. She couldn't understand why I had left, why I was so determined to move on. She thought that I was just angry, that time would heal it. But it wasn't anger that drove me to leave her. It was the realization that there was nothing left for me in that relationship. It wasn't a matter of fighting for something that was already gone. It was about fighting for myself, for the person I used to be, the person I could still become. One night, as I sat in the dim light of my apartment, contemplating everything that had happened over the past few months, my phone buzzed again. It was B. I stared at the message for a long time, not sure whether I should even read it. I had been trying so hard to move on, to start fresh, to build something that wasn't bound by the past. But as I read her message, the same flood of emotions came rushing back. I don't know who you are anymore, the message read. The man I married is gone, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you for leaving. The words stung, not because I still cared for her, but because they were a reminder of how deep the wounds had gone, how deeply I had allowed myself to be suffocated, how much I had lost in trying to please someone who no longer cared. I set the phone down and took a deep breath. I had to let it go. I had to accept that what we had was gone, and it wasn't coming back. There was no point in revisiting the past, in trying to mend something that had already fallen apart. The next day, I went to meet Mara again. The connection between us had deepened, and I realized that, for the first time in a long time, I was letting myself believe in something, anything, that felt real. We sat in a quiet cafe, the sound of gentle conversation and clinking coffee cups in the background. As we talked, I could feel the energy between us shifting, pulling us closer. You seem different, she said, her eyes searching mine. Like you're finally starting to find yourself again. I think I am, I replied, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. It's strange, but I feel like I'm finally seeing things clearly. For the first time in a long time, I'm not just trying to survive. I'm actually living. Mara smiled softly, her hand reaching across the table to rest lightly on mine. Good, she whispered, because I think it's time you start living for yourself. Those words, simple as they were, struck a chord deep inside me. I had spent so long trying to make everyone else happy, trying to fit into roles that didn't suit me. But now, for the first time, I was beginning to realize that living for myself wasn't selfish. It was necessary. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that for the first time in years, I was ready to find out. And that was the moment everything truly changed. The moment when I stopped being the man I had been, the man weighed down by the past, and started becoming the man I was always meant to be. With Mara by my side, I felt like I was finally on the right path. The path that led to a future of possibilities, of new beginnings. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was walking towards something worth fighting for. The days blurred into one another as I navigated through the aftermath of the life I thought I wanted and the reality I was now starting to embrace. It was like stepping into a world where everything was in sharp focus, a contrast to the fog I had been living in for so long. I was no longer trapped by the obligations of a dead marriage, but I was also caught between the excitement of something new and the unsettling fear of letting go completely. I had been holding on to the past for far too long, clinging to a version of myself that no longer fit. Mara and I continued to meet, almost obsessively at times. There was no rush, no need to define what we had, but there was an undeniable pull between us. Each meeting felt like a revelation, a peeling back of layers that I hadn't even realized I was hiding behind. With her, I didn't feel like I had to explain myself. I didn't have to prove my worth. She just understood. I started to find peace in the simplicity of our time together. We didn't talk about the heavy stuff all the time. We talked about life, about art, about the stupid things that made us laugh. But in those moments, I felt something stirring in me, something that had been buried under years of obligation and unspoken resentment. I was starting to believe in the possibility of something real. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. But, as it always goes, life doesn't leave you alone for long, especially when you're least expecting it. He hadn't given up on me, not entirely, at least. The more time passed, the more desperate her attempts became. It started with simple text messages, then phone calls, then emails. She would say things like, "I can't lose you like this," or "We've been through too much for it to end like this." But with each attempt, I felt more resolved. It wasn't just that I didn't want to be with her anymore. It was that I could see now how suffocating it had been, how much of myself I had given up to keep her happy, to keep the peace. And now, I had the chance to find my voice again. I had a chance to rebuild myself from the ground up. But I wasn't prepared for the day she showed up at my apartment. It was a Sunday, and I had spent the morning sitting by the window, sipping coffee and reflecting on everything that had happened. I wasn't thinking about B, not really. I had allowed myself to believe that I was free of her, free of the emotional hold she had once had over me. And then, without warning, there was a knock at the door. I opened it, and there she stood. B, looking just as she had the day I walked away from her. But now, there was something different about her. It wasn't the angry, desperate woman who had bombarded me with messages for weeks. No, this time she was calmer, almost resigned, but there was a heaviness in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. It was like she was finally realizing the truth of what had happened, the truth that I had been running from for so long. "You're really gone, aren't you?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know how to answer at first. Part of me wanted to tell her everything. How much I had suffered, how much I had hoped for something that never came, how I had tried so hard to make her happy. But that was in the past now. I had moved on. I didn't know her anything anymore. "I'm sorry, B," I said, my voice steady but firm. "But I'm not the man you married anymore. I can't keep pretending. I'm sorry, but I'm not coming back." The words were finally out, and I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders. I didn't need to carry the burden of our past anymore. But B wasn't ready to hear that. She stood there, stunned, as if the world had just shifted beneath her feet. "You've really moved on, haven't you?" she asked, her voice tinged with something I couldn't quite place. Was it regret? Was it disbelief? Was it guilt? I couldn't tell, but in that moment, I realized that she was never going to understand. She had never truly seen me, never really heard me. And maybe that was the hardest part of all. I said, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't anger or bitterness. It wasn't regret. It was simply the truth. She nodded slowly, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I don't know how to let go of you." "You don't have to," I replied. "But you do have to let go of the idea of what we were. It's over, B, and I need to move on with my life. You need to do the same." The silence between us stretched for what felt like an eternity, and then she turned and left, her footsteps growing quieter with every passing second. I stood there for a while, unsure of what to feel. But as I closed the door behind me, I realized that I was done. I was finally free. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Mara and I spent more time together, slowly easing into a new kind of relationship. One without the baggage of the past, without the weight of old expectations. We were careful not to rush things, but there was a growing sense that we were building something real, something different. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't have to be. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was fighting against a tide that was always pulling me under. With Mara, I felt like I was standing on solid ground, like I could breathe without feeling like I was suffocating. We didn't talk about the future all the time, but when we did, it wasn't with the pressure of trying to make things work. It was with the understanding that whatever happened, we would face it together. And slowly, the shadows of my past began to fade. It wasn't that they disappeared entirely. They were still there, lurking at the edges of my thoughts, but they didn't have the same power over me anymore. I had learned to accept them as part of who I was, not something to run from. As I sat on the balcony one evening, watching the sun set over the city, I realized that I had made it through the storm. The storm of my marriage, the storm of my self-doubt, the storm of everything that had tried to break me. And now, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally on the other side. The person I had been searching for, who I had always been, was starting to come back to life. And that was just the beginning of a whole new chapter, one that would be mine to write. The months that followed felt like a fresh start, a rebirth in every sense of the word. I had finally learned the value of putting myself first, of stepping out of the shadows of a past that no longer served me. Every day felt like I was uncovering a new layer of who I was, someone who had been buried under years of silence, resentment, and missed opportunities. But now I was free to live, to grow, and to love. Mara and I continued to explore our relationship at a pace that felt right. We didn't rush, but the connection between us deepened in ways that felt natural and comforting. There was no pressure, no expectations to mold ourselves into something we weren't. We simply enjoyed each other's company, laughed about silly things, and supported each other through the highs and lows that life inevitably threw our way. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking on eggshells, constantly worrying about whether I was enough. With Mara, I was enough. And for once, I believed it. B, on the other hand, slowly faded into the background of my life. I realized that while I had once thought we were supposed to be together, I had been holding on to a version of her that no longer existed. She had moved on in her own way, and so had I. There was no anger in it anymore, just acceptance. I didn't need to look back or wonder what might have been. I had found my own way, my own path. I threw myself into the things that made me feel alive. I picked up old hobbies I had abandoned years ago, like painting and writing. I traveled to places I had always dreamed of visiting, but never thought I had the time for. I spent more time with friends, rekindling relationships that had been neglected. The more I gave to myself, the more I realized how much I had been missing. Mara and I talked about the future, not in the way people often do when they feel pressured to define every moment, but in a way that felt hopeful and open. We talked about dreams and possibilities, the kind of things that two people share when they're starting fresh, without the weight of past mistakes hanging over them. We didn't have all the answers, but we didn't need them. The beauty of our relationship lay in the simplicity of it, the ability to share quiet moments, to be ourselves, and to grow together without the fear of losing who we were. Then, one evening, under the soft glow of the setting sun, Mara turned to me, her smile warm and genuine. "You know, I never thought I'd be here," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "But now, I can't imagine being anywhere else." And in that moment, I knew. This was it. This was what I had been waiting for, the kind of love that wasn't born out of desperation or fear, but out of mutual respect, understanding, and the willingness to be vulnerable with one another. I didn't need anything more. I didn't need grand gestures or endless promises. I just needed this quiet, steady love that was built on the foundation of two people who had learned to stand on their own before coming together. I smiled back at her, feeling the warmth of her words wrap around me. "Neither did I whispered. "But I'm glad we're here now." As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, I realized something profound. The past no longer held any power over me. The mistakes, the heartache, the regret, it was all part of the journey, but it no longer defined who I was or who I was becoming. I had found peace in the process of letting go. And in doing so, I had opened myself up to something beautiful, a future full of endless possibilities. I wasn't the same man I had been when I walked away from my old life. I was stronger, wiser, and more at peace with myself than I had ever been. I had learned that sometimes, in order to find the life you truly deserve, you have to let go of everything that no longer serves you. It's not about the destination, it's about the journey and the person you become along the way. And so, as I walked into this new chapter of my life, I did so with the certainty that I had finally found the peace I had been searching for. I was no longer haunted by the ghosts of my past. I was no longer defined by the mistakes I had made or the people who had hurt me. I was free to love, free to live, free to be me. And that, in the end, was the greatest gift of all.